This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice.
Hi, Emerald. Oh, don't touch me.
Tom.
Ew.
We're in the same room.
This is weird, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really weird. We also, who knows if the tech is going to work because we've never done this before. So
We've got such a tech setup. We've got 3 cameras set up.
we've got,
capture
yeah.
this.
There's a camera there. There's a camera there. There's a camera there.
You've all been punked. This is nice. Look at us. We're in Greensland.
We're in
together.
Tom's hotel room. Tom has a spa bath. It's a spa bath, right? It's a giant bath, and I saw the spa things in there.
Yes, I sit in there, drink champagne, and plan the revolution.
Yeah, and there's like leaves on the walls. There's wallpaper.
This is like an annoyingly
Very fancy.
wacky hotel, I think.
It's so annoying when I get to stay in a fancy hotel. I find it so annoying.
It is annoying. But we get to be up close and personal. We get to see how big I am, how small you are.
Always fun. Always
Always
fun.
fun.
Tom is still bigger than me. Yeah. Still, I haven't grown yet, but who knows?
Can confirm.
Yeah.
All right, let's make content. God damn it.
Okay.
Talk about the Greens, that bunch of idiots.
This is the future of Australian politics, whether we like it or not, which is that the Greens' vote is increasing.
I'm suggesting they hate our society.
Frankly, I've always found the Greens to be a real serious danger to Australia.
Serious danger to Australia.
Have you ever watched, Trixie and Katya, the drag queens?
Yes.
They have the YouTube show, and every time they touch each other, it goes bzzz. They should, Mike should do that for us. Nah.
Edit that in.
Yeah.
Michael the Griffin is over there in the room with us.
He is, we swear.
This is Serious Danger, a podcast about Greens politics in Australia. It is not an official Greens Party podcast. I'm Tom Ballard. That's Emerald Moon. Produced by Michael the Griffin, who, again, is in this physical room.
Yeah, it's true. We have new patrons.
Oh,
Should we
my
give them a
God.
Shout out.
What?
I'm going to read off your screen because that's easier. Our
Okay.
new patrons, Avery, Scott, Rosemary, Laura, Vinny, Peter.
That is-
Legends, all of you.
Yes, that is Avery Howard, previous Greens candidate. Thank you very much for joining the
Hi, Avery.
Serious Danger Dog family. Thank you to all the Danger Dogs that came to see me at Melbourne Comedy Festival too and came up afterwards and
They said they were danger dogs? Danger heads? Serious danger heads?
No, I think people prefer Danger Dogs.
Danger dogs.
You get bonus content if you go to patreon.com/seriousdangerau. Pay for as little as $3 a month. You can pay more if you wish. But $3 a month gets you all the bonus content that we produce. We released an episode this week with part of the Moon
My
family,
sister-
Moon Hines family.
Yeah, she's not part of the Moon family, but she is my sister, Georgia Hines. I thought it was really good. A lot of people say, you didn't sound so surprised.
Unlike the normal shit we pump out to you people.
I think at one point I was like, am I just doing this out of love and respect for my sister and bias? And then we did it and I was like, no, that was incredibly interesting.
No, she's like really smart and articulate and hot. And I'm like, you're related?
We are going to now have to work through all of my other siblings because my little sister has already messaged immediately and said, when are you going to interview me? And I've got 6. So
Oh, fucking hell.
yeah, get ready for the rest. We've got 6 episodes.
Great conversation. She's a humanitarian lawyer. She's currently working in like the new frontiers in warfare and the intersection of technology and ethics and killer robots, although she's not allowed to call them killer robots.
Yeah, she doesn't call them that. Autonomous weapons.
Jesus, get out of here.
Yeah.
That episode just came out this week, so sign up to that. Thank you so much to people who have sold out our first non-Greens conference live show.
It's a bit weird, hey.
Everyone refuses to believe that we can be successful.
Well, are you guys sure?
It's just this.
I
You know that, right?
don't
just
know
this.
what we're going to do. I'm feeling a bit stressed about it, to be
It's
honest.
going to be
but
awesome.
it's
Happening
gonna
on
be good.
Sunday, May 21st, a year anniversary.
Stop banging your fucking hand on the couch. People don't like it.
It's my couch for the next day. Year anniversary since the 2022 federal election. Max Chandler Mather, Geraldine Hickey. You might be hearing bits and pieces come through on the podcast. Maybe not the whole thing. We'll keep some special stuff just for the Danger Dogs and Legends who are coming along to the live thing. But the whole thing is totally sold out, and that means the world to us. And thank you to the Good Chat Comedy Club for hosting us.
It really does. Yeah, it's very sweet. It makes me happy. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm just furious that the government says that there's $250 billion for stage 3 tax cuts and $368 billion for nuclear submarines, but they can't commit to lifting single parents and job seekers and people with a disability out of poverty.
Let's talk about the week. On Wednesday, Greens leader Adam Bandt. Ever heard of him?
Sorry, you just said the week on Wednesday. Let's talk about the week on Wednesday, Van Badham's podcast.
I said let's talk about the week.
I understand.
On Wednesday.
Okay. Yeah, no. On
Let's
Wednesday.
talk about the
Let's
week
talk
on
about the week on
Wednesday.
Wednesday. On Wednesday, what happened?
Well, on Wednesday, I listened to my favourite podcast.
The week on Wednesday.
On Wednesday, Greens leader Adam Bandt, who the week on Wednesday are a huge fan of, was back at it at the National Press Club, gave a fiery speech to the Canberra Press Gallery, produced a lot of headlines, a lot of people chatting about it. Has he done it again, Emerald? Is it Google it, mate, all over again?
I don't think it's Google it, mate.
Okay.
It's good, but it's not Google it, mate. Like, that was a moment.
That was a moment.
Yeah.
Yes, way more attention during a federal election campaign.
Yeah.
But I want to hear less about missiles and more about lifting people out of poverty. That's a pretty good line.
It's good. It made me smile. I was watching it on the train being like, good shit, Adam. Yeah.
What was the general vibe? What was he going into there? What do you think was the great mission of this particular press club?
Well, can I tell you a secret?
Yeah.
I haven't watched the speech.
Oh, you just watched that line on the train?
I've seen that speech and I've read the articles. I understand the general vibe, but I'm hoping you can tell me what else he said.
Oh, fuck. I was hoping you'd help me. No, it was a great speech. The main focus was housing. Specifically, Adam was making it clear, doubling down that the Greens will vote down Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund if it is not significantly improved. The government tried to pass it back in March, has not been able to reach an agreement with the Greens, couldn't get it through. Can we briefly recap why does the Housing Future Fund suck and is bad and is no good?
Well, probably the easiest way to explain it is that Labor will tell you this is their $10 billion for housing, and
Yes.
it's not that at
Not
all.
that.
It is a fund that invests public money into the stock market, effectively gambling money on the private stock market, and then it will use the funds generated from that to theoretically pay for social housing, but only up to a certain point.
Yes.
If it loses money, that means negative money for social housing. And even if it does well,
if it
there's a
loses money,
ceiling.
they'll actually demolish housing. Is
They
that
will
right?
demolish
They'll
housing.
actually blow up actual
I think
public.
that's in the agreement. Yeah, and that's what the Greens are fighting to stop. But there's no plan for renters, I think is the other thing. It's
Yes.
just this shitty fake fund. Worth noting, in Queensland, they've done a similar thing. There's a housing fund. It was established, I think, around 2 years ago, hasn't built a single house.
Amazing. We're shooting for 30,000 houses within 5 years, I think. That's the general goal that the huge ambition that the Labor government has laid out.
Right.
It will come out of this fund. As you say, nothing for renters. And a $500 million maximum spend every year.
Yeah.
So that's the most it could ever
Maximum,
spend
yeah.
every year. And no minimum spend. So
They
as you
want to
say-
limit themselves, yeah. And to put that into perspective, like I am sure maybe you've got the figure on the shortfall of social and affordable housing across Australia, but even just in Queensland, I know, for example, it's like 26,000, maybe more households on the social housing waitlist currently, and that's like priority high need just in Queensland right now. So if we're talking about 30,000 homes over 5 years, it's nowhere near enough.
It's not going to touch the sides. And this is where I think it's probably, you could argue it's a little tricky for the Greens to say that the housing fund is going to make the housing crisis worse. What we really mean is that if you introduce this fund, the housing crisis will be worse within 5 years, if you know what I mean. So the fund isn't technically making the housing crisis worse, but the housing crisis will get worse and this fund won't affect that.
Well, it's kind of a question of ideologically, like, do you believe that the government has responsibility for a housing plan for Australia, like for its citizens? And I think as socialists, we believe that yes, the government should play a role in housing people because housing is a thing that people need to live.
Yes.
But yeah, then so in that case, yeah, then the housing policy that is implemented by the government of the day would dictate, or like you at least have to admit that it affects the housing crisis. So it's like this plan will make the housing crisis worse.
Right.
Whereas,
because this is the totality of the housing plan of this current government. This is what they're saying they're going to do.
Yeah.
And cut to 5 or 10 years later.
Yeah.
The housing crisis is even worse than it is now.
Yeah. And I think it's also like if you then bring into account all of the tax breaks, which is kind of what, Adam's speech was getting into.
Yep.
If you take that all into account with Labor's housing policy, and obviously, I'll admit this is a bit of a stretch rhetorically because we're talking about the fund that is part of this legislation. That's not necessarily saying, yes, we do keep or scrap negative gearing. But yes, Labor's approach to housing right now is making the housing crisis worse by incentivizing profiteering and a speculation, like using property as a speculative commodity rather than a human right for homes for people to live in.
Yeah. And I think we've seen this so many times. This is when the Greens are really strong, when they keep coming back to the actual problem facing people, because I feel like the government just wants to say, we're doing something on housing. Okay, leave us alone. Stop yelling at us. This is the only option we have to address housing crisis. Whereas Greens are saying, here's the actual problem. Here are the numbers. Here is the shortfall. Here's how bad the actual crisis is. We want to actually address that problem.
Yeah.
And it's not, you don't just get political points for saying we're doing something on housing. It's like you should actually do, as a progressive so-called government, you should actually do the stuff that's actually going to make that problem better and actually address the problem. So the scale of your solution should meet the scale of the problem.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
So let's talk about the things that Adam called for here, and we'll get to the big rent freeze in a sec, but here are some of the other points. The Greens want the funding from this housing fund for social affordable housing to be increased from a $500 million cap to $5 billion per year.
That's pretty big. It's a big difference.
Big greed, if you ask me. But direct funding of 225,000 publicly owned properties over the next decade. So let's just bump up that ambition, please, from 30,000 to try to get even close to addressing the shortfall that we have in this country. A doubling of Commonwealth rent assistance, and again, scrapping these concessions. So the capital gains discount, 50% discount on assets, which has spurred the housing crisis and property speculation, and negative gearing concessions for people with more than one investment property.
Yeah.
The Parliamentary Budget Office estimates the whole thing, scrapping those, would raise $74 billion in revenue over the next decade.
Can I just say, what's funny? I've just realized you saying this is the first time I've understood that the demand, the $5 billion per year, is them saying that's lifting the ceiling on how much money can be spent from the returns that this fund generates.
Right.
I thought that they were talking about direct investment in social and affordable housing, but you're saying that actually that's direct funding of 225,000 publicly owned property. So is that separate to that $5 billion from the fund?
No, I think that's the kind of money that's the kind of the direct investment that is coming out of the fund.
Yeah, but that's still not direct investment, right? Like it's still going to come from the returns of the fund. So if the fund doesn't generate any money, do we get that direct investment? Surely the Greens are pushing for like a guarantee that those homes will be funded.
A guarantee from that money that you would be spending, a guarantee that you'd be spending $5 billion a year from that fund in order to
even if it loses money?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, because this is the question, right? And I think we got we had Patty, I think, on Instagram message us about this a few weeks ago about whether ideologically we oppose the idea of this fund as a way to deliver housing, and comparing it to something like Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, which delivers funding for the welfare state there, and like, is it a bad idea? Just totally in theory, for example, if that cap was lifted or removed altogether, would this still be a bad idea? And my view is like, I just don't think that public money should be gambled on the stock market. Like I think we were talking about this beforehand. You were like, well, we should abolish the stock market, which I agree. And so it's like, yeah, do we really want like, in an ideal world or as a policy that we would support, I just don't think we would support establishing a fund like this. We would support direct investment rather than propping up a stock market that is, capitalism in its pure form.
It's also just like if you've got $5 billion, you could also just sit on it and it will have more money next year as well. Like, in terms of returns on that when you're talking about that size of money.
Social housing also delivers a return.
Yes, right. Social housing, you also just get returns.
Because you collect rent.
Yeah. Is Commonwealth rent assistance dodgy too? I've heard a little bit of this too. Like, we're asking for the doubling of it. My understanding from a bunch of leftist critiques is that it's basically just subsidizing the private rental market, right? You're just handing over, again, shitloads of public money to private landlords.
Yeah.
Now, there are people who rely on Commonwealth rent assistance in order to keep a roof over their head.
Yeah.
So that's good. And while we don't have 225,000 green homes built immediately, then is pumping more money into that private rental market a way
Again, yeah, like it's that argument between like what you would want ideally, what you would propose if you were in government versus what do we support from something that's already in place. I think it's true, like until we have a robust social housing system that can actually meet need and beyond, even, you know, working towards a universal social housing system where it's not just the most disadvantaged people who can access it. Yes, like Commonwealth rent assistance is probably saving lives at the moment, and it's a shitty part of a shitty privatized housing system. So I understand the critique from, I think, a lot of leftists. Yeah, like there have been some people lobbying the Greens and saying that they shouldn't be supporting rent assistance because it legitimizes that really shitty system.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe what the Greens should be doing, and I think the Greens have been doing, is saying that rent assistance is not a perfect solution. No. It's certainly not a permanent solution. In the current circumstances, though, it would be a benefit to have that increase.
Right.
And I also think it's something that, like, in terms of people who aren't just like very online and on Twitter, the vast majority of people who are ripe for the picking for like growing the Greens movement, that's something that would be immensely popular. People would get it and be like, oh yeah, like we need rent assistance.
This would be helpful. And the history of that payment is so sinister too, right? Because it ties into the history of the government outsourcing the provision of housing to the private sector, right? So under Menzies, you've got the government directly building 1 in 5 houses. You know, housing people was seen as something of a Commonwealth government responsibility.
Yeah.
And after a while you go, oh no, we don't have to build or own the houses. We can just sort of, subsidize this private rental market by handing out money to the most vulnerable people so they can take that money and give it directly to their landlord. And the system works beautifully.
Yes.
But also I think the concerns about increasing Commonwealth rent assistance is, well then, you know, rents will just go up.
Right.
So what you need there
So what should we do about that?
You need yourself a little rent freeze.
A little rent freeze. And a rent cap in the long term.
Yes, please. We talked about this a little bit before, particularly when the bill was kicking around the lower house, and Max was explaining that the Greens would oppose it or reserve their decision on the housing bill. But Adam put a bit more detail on what the 2-year rent freeze that the Greens are calling for is all about. It'd be done in coordination with the states. You do it by establishing a rent freeze housing fund with an annual $1.6 billion of extra funding for housing. That would basically double the funding that the states get every year, making it conditional and imposing a 2-year freeze on rents, followed by capped rent raises after that.
Yeah.
States could use that money to then build new housing, to buy existing housing. I want to see a lot more of
that.
that.
Like the NRAS houses, for example, that are going to fall out of, like NRAS scheme is winding up.
Right.
This is a big thing that we've been talking about in Queensland, because we're going to lose, I think, maybe the biggest proportion of NRAS homes.
What are NRAS homes, just for people?
National Rental Affordability Scheme, which Morrison government scrapped, and Labor decided to just go with that and not replace it with anything.
Right.
And it's subsidised housing. So again, not a perfect system. Obviously, we don't love NRAS, but there are around like 6,000 homes that were on the NRAS scheme that will be lost to the private market. Just completely uncapped rents over the next few years. And the Queensland government has said they're going to buy something like, I don't know, it's like a handful of those homes so far. And we're saying, well, you should be buying, basically trying to buy all of those homes and turn it into social housing, because that's housing right there that people who need limited rent, who need affordable housing, would just be left to the whims of the incredibly hostile private rental market otherwise.
Right. In his speech, Adam was saying that this is totally doable. He pointed to the eviction moratorium on the pandemic. That was the federal government coordinating with the state, stepping in to try and protect the rights of renters when there was a goddamn deadly disease flying around the place. And many states already have an annual rent cap. That is, telling people you can only raise rents once during a 1-year period. They don't limit how much you can raise it by, which is a problem.
I would even be I would be hesitant to call that a rent cap, but yeah.
Well, but Adam's just saying the principle's the same. So if you extended that to 2 years,
yes,
right, you could say, okay, you can only raise rents every 2 years. That is effectively a 2-year rent freeze, right?
Yeah.
Adam said it is unacceptable and irresponsible for the Prime Minister to throw his hands up and put the Greens' rent freeze proposal in the too hard basket when Labor holds almost every seat around the National Cabinet table. With wall-to-wall Labor state governments on the mainland, Labor can't pass the buck on the rental crisis anymore.
So true. It's really interesting in Queensland. I'm curious to know what's happening in other states, because in Queensland, I've even seen the Labor government almost having a go at the federal government, like criticising them for their failure to keep NRAS or to implement a plan. And like that they're actually willing to criticize their federal colleagues on this is very interesting.
Now, this to me seems like a slight tweak. I think I remember when Max was originally out there, they were saying that they were like basically going to hold housing funding as the hostage to states in order to get on board the rent freeze. I think there's some critiques of that. But this sounds more like, hey, we're going to offer you extra funding. If you want access to this extra funding, the condition of that is to implement a 2-year rental freeze.
It does seem slightly less. I'm curious to know why they landed on that, because I would think that it would then be easier for states to say no, right? Especially when they could just be like, well, we don't, want that money if we think that like if we're just going to buy the line from the real estate lobby, which is that this will force investors to exit the market, and that'll somehow, don't know where those homes will go, but it will mean less supply, make the rental crisis even worse. They'll say that it'll mean wealthy people buy up those homes. So it's like, but what are those people doing with those homes? But anyway, and so I think it's very likely that state governments will buy that and use that to be like, well, no, we don't want to just take that money for then something that's going to make the crisis worse. Apparently, no thanks.
Jesus,
who knows?
Do you think this has changed? Do you think the average punter thinks that a rent freeze is possible? Like, or do they dismiss that, or would they be opposed to that because they think it's a bad idea, or because they literally think the government can't do it? And has, I guess, the pandemic changed all that? And has the pandemic illustrated the governments can be powerful, it can intervene in the market in this way? That is, are the Greens onto a thing when we say we want a 2-year rent freeze? That is totally possible. Do you think that's cutting through?
I actually don't know if the pandemic did it. I think we were really hopeful and we used that messaging for a long time. And I guess we are still using it a little bit to say that, governments can intervene in an emergency situation and do something like this. But I feel like that wasn't enough. I think what has changed is the intensity and scale of the housing crisis and the rental crisis in particular, and the fact that so many people have either experienced that personally or had seen someone very close to them or in their circle being, not have access to housing in a way that you kind of expected that you would be able to, particularly for people who like working people and people that just wouldn't have expected that they could be facing homelessness a few years ago, absolutely now could be. And so I think there is an expectation that like this is it's in an emergency and it requires an emergency response. I think that is certainly part of like the general consensus at the moment.
And there's something particularly pernicious about getting a rent increase and you're just paying more money to live in the same place. You know what I mean? So rent's up, I think, 10% on last year, something like that across the board. And I think when people experience that, when your landlord says, hey, I'm putting up your rent by this much, and we know how shit landlords are and they don't fix anything, and they, no one is a huge fan of their landlord, particularly broadly speaking. Just the fact that we're saying you're paying more money and getting nothing extra out of it. Your house is not anymore nice.
No.
Your house is just where you're
obviously the argument is that their mortgage is costing more.
Right.
Which is true.
Yeah.
Like in many cases, people have been hit pretty hard by interest rate rises. But yes, like I think that it's not necessarily, does that justify raising the rent to an extent where it's interesting, that argument when it's like, yeah, people will accept that, okay, it's a choice between this person not being able to pay their mortgage comfortably or this person not being able to pay their rent and potentially being homeless.
Yes.
And in their view, they're like, those are equal, and actually potentially the person who's been able to afford an investment property, they should take precedence over the person who might be
property.
Yes.
An investment property.
Yeah.
So
Not
the
their
idea that
home.
These wonderful landlords are providing housing. It's like, no, they bought it as an investment.
Yeah. And I understand that they have been encouraged to do that, to like over leverage themselves on the private property market as a way to build wealth, because there are very few other ways to build wealth in Australia, because this is capitalism and it is much harder to make money enough that you can be comfortable by fucking working hard. The only feasible way is to, take other people's fucking money that they have earned through their hard work and to build wealth through capital. So yes, it makes sense that people would turn to that. And it kind of like, that fucking sucks, but it's like we have to start unraveling it at some point.
Yes, please. Like this line from Adam too. With all his question time contempt about a rent freeze being pixie dust and his reported delight about campaigning the next election on his housing bill failing in the Senate, the Prime Minister needs to understand this isn't an inner Sydney council meeting and a chance to get even with the Greens.
Wow. That's a bit spicy, isn't it? Yeah.
Albanese did dismiss the rent freeze as pixie dust in Parliament.
Okay.
I mean, he keeps making constitution arguments. There was actually a referendum in 1948. Ben Chifley tried to get Commonwealth power over rents and prices. Wouldn't that be fucking awesome?
Yeah, that would be good.
But that failed, so it doesn't work. But obviously, we've made it very clear that this is totally possible and have laid out how to. Albanese said, this whole position makes me wonder what the Greens party's political and thought processes are. They're out there saying they want more investment in social and affordable housing. And their strategy to do that is to block $10 billion to create a fund for investment in social and affordable housing. This is on top of all the other stuff we're doing. And then it said that we've caught the disease of the no-alition, where we just vote no to everything.
No.
They've caught this bizarre disease just saying no to everything without any rational explanation. It's just like, fuck you. You know exactly what the explanation is.
And it is, again, that entitlement of the fucking Labor Party, the same as when it comes to them, like, keeping seats, that they're like, we are entitled to these seats for some reason. They're Labor seats.
Stop
Greens
stealing our
can't
seats,
challenge
Greens.
them. And again, they're like, well, we won government, even though we don't have majority in the Senate, and that's why you've got this problem. But they're like, and so we're entitled to pass whatever we want, and it's incumbent on you to justify why you would not pass that. And it's like, well, okay, why don't you explain why you are blocking $5 billion direct investment in housing?
Yes.
If you want to do something about the housing crisis, why do you not have to explain that?
Yes.
So, because that's actually what you're doing. You could do that. The Greens are putting that to you. Why would you block housing, Albanese?
Why would you
do that?
What? But you grew up in public housing.
You grew up in public housing. Why do you hate? And like the kind of language that Labor is using against the Greens, like why do they care so little about domestic and family violence survivors? Why do they care so little about, families who are sleeping in tents and cars that they would block this? It's like, yeah, good question. Why would you block this?
Why would you block this? We care more than you motherfucker.
Yeah.
And yes, the obvious, if you ask these people, like, why do you think, like in a sincere way, why do you think the Greens are voting for this? They can't say, oh, I have no idea. It's like they haven't made clear to it. It's because they want more investment and they want to go further, you fucking weirdos. Queensland Deputy Premier Stephen Miles said the Greens policies will not deliver a single additional affordable house for a Queenslander. Here we go. Here's the real estate lobby coming down the pipeline. The only thing a policy like that would do is to drive investors out of the market and cause people to stop developments that are already underway. We've heard that from investors, from developers. We need more supply and more stock, and policies like that. One, extreme radical policies like that one, the rent freeze, might be good for getting the Greens political party a headline, but it will not deliver a single additional affordable home for a Queenslander.
Do we really think that like developers and investors who stand to make significant money from a property market are just going to be like, actually, I'm going to pull out completely and do what? Do fucking what? Because they rely on renters to grow their wealth.
Yes. Because
they're not going to be able to raise the rent for a couple of years, and then they'll be able to raise it in line with inflation.
Inflation, yes.
So,
no, my business model is dependent on squeezing tenants for all they're worth forever.
And there's clear evidence from came out during the inquiry when Amy McMahon here in Queensland moved a bill for rent caps and other renters' rights. Clear evidence that was offered there that rent caps are not associated with a reduction in supply.
Nope.
It's not real. It's pixie dust, some might say.
Maybe the tide is turning. Someone tweeted out, shout out to @PostingGeneral for pointing out that the Labor seems to be losing the key Reddit forum of Friendly Jordies demographic.
Things that made me smile this week.
Comments like, Greens got it right. Labor's housing fund is a joke. 30,000 houses over 10 years is pathetic. I think it might be 5 years, but still pathetic. It's more than pathetic. They're complicit. I'm with Adam Bandt on this one. The Profits $10 billion policy will do fuck all. Normally prefer Labor over Greens on policy, but not on this one. It's pathetic. Good to finally see someone with a real platform call out these bastards for ignoring this for so long. The only way they'll do anything is if they're forced to, and even then it's questionable.
So interesting.
Look forward to Friendly Jordies' response to his fans.
There were people being like, is Friendly Jordies going to come out and criticize Labor on this because, he's only too willing to go after the Greens. I think there are people who follow Friendly Jordies who genuinely don't realize that he is just a probably paid Labor shill and are like, can't wait to see Jordan's take on this. Do you reckon that they will start to turn away from Labor? Like, would we Are we finally going to get the Friendly Jordies demographic?
To come over to Serious Danger.
To come over to Serious Danger, to come over to the Greens?
He said we should put this in the intro, but there is footage of Friendly Jordies back in the day saying stuff like the Greens are better on policy. I know that, but power, etc., etc. Like,
now, does this mean they're the best Australian party when it comes to the environment? Obviously, when there's one with the word green in it, not by a mile. They continued the multi-billion-dollar taxpayer subsidies to the fossil fuel industry and approved mining in the most pristine rainforest on Earth, the Tarkine. Inexcusable. Unless, of course, you're a true believer like myself who can very easily sweep that under the rug, as they are a major party. And as much as I love the Greens, in the words of the eternal Gough Whitlam, God rest his soul, there is nothing moral about being in opposition.
He knows the Greens are correct and have the correct sort of political analysis, but he's just pure on the power.
But do you think he's, I mean, even him being skewed by the fact that he is probably getting paid by Labor and all of that. But I would say his politics have probably become more conservative over time. I think he's...
Thanks to woke cancel culture.
Well, kind of.
I mean, I also think, I don't watch his channel much at all. Every now and again, I used to have videos come through. He seems to just completely have moved off domestic politics now. He just sort of talks about almost anything else. But
yeah, because I know
he was Labor wall to wall. He's got up to the same.
Yeah, true.
or still wrapping up John Barilara's stuff and old corruption scams.
Yeah, anyway. Okay.
All right, how do we think this is going to shake out? Should the Greens vote this down in theory? Can we do that? Can we get away with it? Is the Labor government going to give anything close to what we're talking about? What do you think?
I think, perhaps in the wake of the climate bill stuff, or safeguard mechanism, when we didn't end up blocking that. And I think I was saying to you then, I'm not sure that the Greens have as much justification, politically, strategically, to block the housing bill as they did to block safeguard mechanism, because that was about, are we opening up new coal and gas mines that'll make the crisis worse? Whereas when we say this will make the housing crisis worse, yes, the argument's a little bit more convoluted. But I think my view has maybe changed. I just think that the public understanding of how shitty this proposal is so much greater. And that's because of the fucking hard work of Max's office and the Greens, across the country, and people getting out there talking to people on the doors, doing mail outs, doing calls, all of that. And from what I understand, I haven't been out on one of those door knocks. There's actually more happening this weekend, I know, around Brisbane and surrounding suburbs and stuff. But anyone who has been out there and spoken to an average person about this, they are like, I think, sounds like you probably should block it. Yeah. People are like, that sounds pretty bad. Yeah. If the Greens have the power to get something better here, then they should. And I think it will be, and I also still, as I think I said around the time of the safeguard mechanism, we got to block something at some point, because otherwise we do kind of lose. We need to demonstrate that, yes, we are willing to stand up for our principles, and we will flex our muscles in the Senate. And that is exactly why we told you to vote for us, so that we would have the balance of power and we would use it to secure better outcomes. So I think, we have to get something. I do think it sounds as though negotiation has been hard on this. They really don't want to give us fucking anything.
Where is Julie Collins, the housing minister?
Yeah, it seems like it's
anywhere?
It seems like it's just Albanese on this, and I get the impression that Albanese in particular hates the Greens and hates Max as the housing spokesperson.
Yes.
And so that's difficult. I think they really won't want to give us anything. But if they don't, I don't think that it will significantly backfire for the Greens. I think that the whole story of the Greens making the perfect the enemy of the good and that stuff with, CPRS actually is dulled. I think that that's just not working with people anymore. And I think people are like, wait, so you passed this thing that does nothing for renters when the rental crisis is
so bad.
Yeah.
Well, yes, but also from Labor's point of view, okay, so the Greens ended up voting for the climate bill and the safeguard. Okay, so from their point of view, let's just, press repeat again. Let's just hammer them. Let's just say they're in the way of progress and they're unreasonable radical hippies. From the Greens' point of view, we can say, no, we have been reasonable on these two other things, so we don't just block everything. Yeah, this is a fucking red line for us, and we're going to vote it down.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, and I increasingly just think that if there's one thing, I mean, obviously, climate is an existential threat to humanity.
Yes,
and we need to keep doing that. But housing is just. It's just the biggest thing for everyone right now.
Totally. Well, on that note, A report this week that the rental crisis is even worse than we imagined. Less than 1% of rentals in Australia are affordable for a single person on the minimum wage. With a new report finding that housing affordability has plummeted to new lows. The stark findings reveal that less than 1% of the rentals were affordable for someone on the age or disability support pension, while there was not one affordable house for someone on youth allowance. For a single person of job seeker, just 4 rentals across the country, this is in one weekend, were affordable, and all of those were rooms in share houses.
Fight to the death for those rooms.
Jesus Christ. So, yes.
It's bleak. It's bleak out there.
Yeah. Well, thank God the Greens and Max and Adam are fighting for something better, and it's the least they can fucking do.
Yeah.
I was invited to the wedding. I said I would go, and I keep my commitments, including to Kyle Sandilands. A bloke who at one stage was homeless, living on the streets of Sydney, is a part of what is an Australian success story.
Okay, what's your next question, Mum?
Okay, have you had sex?
I've already told you the story of this. And don't look at me and smile because it's not funny. Oh, okay, I got raped when I was 12 years old.
Right. And is that the only experience you've had?
Update. Tom has a free minibar at the hotel. There are free snacks and there are free drinks. He's drinking a non-alcoholic espresso martini that he thinks tastes bad. I had a sip. It was okay.
Awful.
I've got a lemon sparkling water. It's pretty bad.
We're going pretty crazy. Serious danger on tour, baby.
You know who wouldn't be going crazy?
Don't even
Single
try to
parents who were pushed off the payment when their youngest child turned 8 as a result of the Gillard government decision back in 2012.
Well, hang on. Julie Gillard was our first female prime minister.
She's a feminist icon.
Yes.
So why would she do that to so many predominantly single mothers? Who can say?
She was barren.
That's not.
I'm sorry. I apologize for that. But I didn't originate that. Anyway, carry on.
Okay. Well, the reason I bring this up is because this week we heard that something may be done to reverse the past wrongs of this decision by the Gillard government. The Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee.
I love that committee.
That committee that recommended raising job seeker. This was set up, or it was negotiated by David Pocock to advise on welfare changes ahead of each budget.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that it has recommended apparently is increasing support for the single parenting payment to undo some of that damage that the Gillard government did back in 2012.
Right, recommended increasing job seeker, which we discussed on last week's show.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
as well. So the background on this, and I have to admit, I knew that there was this story of Gillard cutting or fucking over people, particularly single mothers, on the single parenting payment back in 2012 on the exact same date that she gave her famous misogyny speech.
Yes.
I didn't realize the actual mechanics of what happened.
Right.
So what this was that in rewinding back to 2006, the Howard government stopped parents from claiming the parenting payment when their youngest child turned 8. It used to be 16 before that. So that's a pretty significant cut. We were talking about this and it's like 8 years old. So you no longer have to look after them. We were saying, I guess they should be in the workforce at that point making jams.
Yes. Well, isn't the age of 7 the age of knowledge or something? Isn't that, in religion?
What?
The age of religion is like once a child gets to 7, because that's when you do
that's
your
what it was based
confirmation
on?
or your communion or whatever. Yeah, that's what actually Howard bases his entire policy on.
I don't know about this. But anyway, that truly evil decision.
You can start sinning, I think, from age 7.
You can start you can't sin before then.
I don't think so, no.
That's good to know. Maybe that's why, and we'll get to this, the minimum age of criminal responsibility in a lot of US states, I think even still was 7 or is 7. Yeah.
Good Lord.
But anyway, back to this decision by the Howard government in 2006. One thing that he did do is put in place this grandfathering arrangement. So parents who had been on the payment in July 2006 were allowed to keep it until their youngest child turned 16. And that also meant that subsequent siblings were still covered.
Oh my God.
But that grandfathering arrangement, even that, which was obviously a lifeline for some people who were already on the payment, then Gillard came in 2012 and was like, no, we're going to cut you off too.
She got rid of that.
She got rid of that. So that's what she did in 2012. She ended that grandfathering arrangement. That meant that around, and the stats on this varied. Some said 80,000, some said around 100,000, but around, 100,000 parents pushed off the single parenting payment onto New Start at the time, which obviously is now Job Seeker.
Yep.
At the time, there was vociferous opposition, as you can imagine, from groups like ACOS. There were like protests outside of Parliament as Gillard was giving this speech. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. There were women outside being like, please don't cut my fucking income so that I can look after my children. This decision cut for those thousands and thousands of parents their income by, again, range from maybe around $100 to $172 a fortnight, which might sound small to someone who is getting a decent income, might sound small, particularly for someone like Gillard or politicians who are making these decisions.
Yes.
But for these parents who might be on an extremely low income, that can make a huge difference in their lives. And so this was a real blow to a lot of single parents. Apparently, even ahead of this decision, there was lobbying to the extent that a joint parliamentary committee looked at this. It recommended, it actually ended up as well that committee looked at the rate of New Start, because it was like, well, these parents are going to be pushed onto New Start. They're also then going to have to meet the mutual obligations that come with New Start around working minimum hours and stuff, because by that point they should no longer just be caring for their children because that's not real work or something. And they said things about how low New Start was at the time. They, quote, questioned whether New Start provided recipients with a standard of living that is acceptable in the Australian context for anything but the shortest period of time, which... just so ironic that this is literally, that's, about 10 years ago now, and still we have a completely inadequate job seeker rate, and we have all these parents who are on it from the time that their youngest child turns 8 years old, and we still have a government that's insisting that it's okay because it's only meant to be a stopgap, and we would just want people getting back into work as soon as possible.
That's so much because I've heard, I think Gillard was challenged on that decision on Q&A, and her defense was it was our decision that we just carried on, or continued on. But it sounds like she went even further than that. Like,
she ended the grandfathering
entering the
arrangement.
grandfathering. Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
man.
that's right. Like, obviously Howard is evil and he started it. But I mean, apparently, so I didn't realize this. So the chair of this new committee that Pocock set up is Jenny Macklin, who was the relevant social services or the relevant minister at the time of that decision in the Gillard government.
I don't think that's quite right. I was just listening to the party room this week.
Because that was reported somewhere.
Yeah, I think that was a mistake. I think Fran Kelly said that last week. She apologised. She was in the cabinet. She wasn't a relevant minister.
Okay.
And so she's been out there trying to defend herself, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah.
But certainly you've got, a Labor government now. Katie Gallagher, who's the finance minister, has lived experience of being on the payment.
Yes,
right? So she's talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, her partner died in a cycling accident. I think it was. She was pregnant at the time, and she has said in interviews, like maybe even just this week, that the single parenting payment changed her life, effectively, saved her life in a way, and so she knows how important it is. And that's what's interesting. Her and Albanese as well are on the record saying that this basically that Gillard got it wrong, that was a bad decision. Apparently, Albanese, when running for the Labor leadership, he described it as a mistake to cut the support at the time. But it's unclear at this stage, and maybe we'll know more by the time this episode is out, it's unclear what changes the committee's actually recommending or what the government will actually do in the budget. We'll know when the budget comes around the following week. There's some reporting, for example, in the AFR that the committee isn't specifically advocating for a like-for-like reversal, so not necessarily saying it should go back to 16 years old. Some are saying that it means that they'll put it up to 12 years old instead as a limit, or there may just be a suggestion that they'll offer some sort of other support to the single parenting payment. Maybe they would raise the rate or something like that, instead of just putting it back to what it was before this decision was made. But the Teals in particular, as well as the advocacy groups on this, I think like National Council of Single Mothers, are all saying that it should be brought back to 16. It is something that I'm like, well, it's good to see the Teals doing Teal stuff, I guess. This is something that they should be doing.
Maybe they'll get another task force or another committee or another review.
Yeah, it's a bit sad, isn't it? But, they've released, similar Greens tactics. They've got Parliamentary Budget Office costing on how much it would cost. Apparently, the Independent Zoe Daniel was saying that it would cost the government roughly $640 million over the next 3 years to cover parents until their children are 12, or $1.1 billion until the children reach 16. And again, in the scheme of things, stage 3 tax cuts, nuclear subs,
nothing.
Probably nothing.
The stage 3 tax cuts, which are going to cost us even more than we previously expected. I think there was modelling recently saying that they've actually, like, the blowout is even further than we thought.
There was a blowout on the blowout.
And actually, I'll link this through the show notes. The ABC did do a pretty amazing infographic that tried to visually represent how much the stage 3 tax cuts are. Like, they're like, here's a square. This is what the median income is. And then they just are like, and this is what the tax cuts are. And you scroll and you scroll and you scroll. It's pretty fucking bleak, but very well done. Well done, ABC.
It's incredibly bleak. I mean, what do you think that the government's going to do on this?
Well, I mean, you can imagine them coming up with some kind of shitty compromise.
That you couldn't even imagine. Like, this is the thing. So often with Labor, I can't even predict what weird, like, bureaucratic, nonsensical, shitty, solution that they will come up with to avoid doing what is actually recommended.
Loan scheme. Loans to single parents. And when you hook up with someone,
microfinance loans for the parents of Australia.
You get free subscription to, like, Tinder Premium to try and find a partner.
Oh my God. Fuck. Yeah. Well, the Greens obviously, so previously the Greens had been pushing to bring it back to 16.
Yep.
But then last year, when ahead of the federal election, we released our social security policies. This is one of the payments that we would be brought under the National Livable Income Guarantee, which would be set at $88 a day, along with, things like JobSeeker, all those other payments, and would be indexed against the Henderson poverty line to make sure that it at least keeps track with that. So, I mean, yes, we haven't yet seen, I think, a Greens response specifically to this, probably because the government hasn't even said what it's going to do yet.
Yep.
I would imagine we would support, lifting the age somewhat, but be pushing for it to be higher and for the rates to be higher as well.
I mean, not to be ultra leftist, of course, again, but is there an argument that single basing parents on your couple status is also a bit fucked up, and that's not all even universal? And
yeah, well, this is what was interesting, because I think that there are there's a parenting payment that's different for couples versus singles, right? And so it's not a universal payment.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that, the Greens, as part of that National Livable Income Guarantee, it's about making it more of a universal payment, removing mutual obligations, and getting rid of some of those barriers to accessing payments.
Yeah, and the way JobSeeker works, and your income is based on your partner's income, which is also fucked up, particularly if they're abusive relationships, and the way that people become financially independent and reliant on each other. It's like, it's so fucking bullshit.
Yeah, it's true.
I think it's interesting how, and I think this has certainly changed socially. Single mothers have been demonized for a very long time, in our society as well. And, by isolating them.
Do you think that's true? The single mothers have been demonized? I would say they're almost valorized.
Really?
Or don't you think everyone's like, oh, single mothers, heroes?
I think that's definitely where we are now. But I think there was definitely a history with it under social conservatism of judging women who are trying to raise kids by themselves, and particularly women who choose to have kids by themselves without a partner.
I guess so. I think there's certain, but now I guess we're in this situation, where socially it's like they're heroes, and oh my God, Albo had a single mom, and that's so wonderful.
Yep.
But then in reality, we will make it incredibly difficult for them to live their lives and look after their children.
Right. Yeah, sure.
Speaking of children,
go to them.
The other thing that happened this week, again around age thresholds, interestingly, and weirdly, I just didn't see much coverage, even though I've been following the minimum age of criminal responsibility issue for some time. Didn't see too much coverage of this, that Victoria has said they will raise the minimum age at which a child can be charged and, in theory, incarcerated under their criminal laws from 10 years old, because remember, children can be locked up at 10 years old in Australia.
Yep.
To 12.
12. Oh, thank God.
So a lot better. I mean, interestingly.
Thank God we're getting those 13-year-olds off our streets.
Well, 12-year-olds too. But keep in mind, I think that's what people don't realize. When you say raising the minimum age to 12, you're talking about still putting 12-year-olds in prison, still charging 12-year-olds in exactly the same way as you would charge an adult for criminal offences. They say that they would do that by the end of 2024 is their proposal, raise it to 12, and then by 2027 raise it to 14. which is the bare minimum recommended by the UN. I guess probably today when we're recording this in Brisbane, they were going to bring this to the national meeting of Attorney Generals or National Cabinet, which has been looking at the issue of the age of criminal responsibility for years, since 2018, and states like Queensland have been using that as an excuse not to raise the age, as an excuse to reject a Greens bill to raise the age to at least 14 because there's this national process ongoing. It's very complicated.
You couldn't
possibly understand.
Should it be good to put kids in prison? Is it bad to put kids in prison?
Yeah.
These are big questions.
What if, the Murdoch media is saying that it's good to put kids in prison? We have to weigh that up as well. It's all very complicated and important. This is the same national process that recommended raising the age to at least 14. We know that now, but they buried that report.
Great.
Like, we still don't know exactly what happened there, but some states and territories or just one, or who knows, were like, no, don't release that. Just hold on to that for now. Ended up getting leaked, of course, the fact that they recommended this, but then they were like, we're just not going to do that for now. And instead, the most recent thing that we'd heard from is that they were working towards a proposal to raise the age to 12. So we kind of knew this was coming.
Okay.
It is somewhat encouraging that Victoria is saying that they are also putting in line like a commitment to then raise it to 14.
Yeah.
But the fact is that like that kind of incrementalism, it just makes there's literally not a single piece of evidence or justification in any way to raise it to 12. It's just a random figure that they've plucked out of nowhere to be like,
well, it's a sensible centre.
Well, yes, that's it. It's just like a compromise for kids for people who want to see children locked up in prison.
Yes.
They're like, oh, okay, no. And it's a compromise that really works for people who want kids to be locked up in prison because it affects the tiniest minority of children in that under 14-year-old cohort who are actually impacted by the criminal legal system right now or in detention. In Victoria, I think it's around 10% of children who come into contact with police are 10, 11 years old, in under 14. So the vast majority, that means that 90% of the kids in that cohort are not going to be impacted by this at all until 2027 after the next election, which, maybe they'll probably fucking lose and then it'll never happen.
Yeah, Jesus. And what, like the worst case scenario, again, from putting on my Labour brain hat, is like, okay, you announce you're going to raise it to 14. The Murdoch media finds the one example of some kid that did something horrible that fits into this age category and will say, hey, Daniel Andrews wants this person out on the street or whatever.
Yeah.
As opposed to making the very clear analysis that if people that young are engaging in such violent crime, that's a failure on society. Like something horrible has happened in this person's life. Or, we are not doing a correct job as a society providing opportunities for that child to live a decent life that has driven them to the point where they're or they don't have the mental health care they need. Like, that's the way the insane Murdoch media would approach that. And I'm not saying that's an excuse. Labor should be able to have that fight, for fuck's sake, and justify the fact that putting children in prison is bad and wrong.
It's bad. Well, and it doesn't fucking work. That's the thing. Yes. It does not work. And
notoriously, when people go to prison, they come out of it being like, no
all
more
better
crime
now.
for me.
No more. Yeah, so much better now, especially children.
Just as young people,
that's why I was concerned, like, as of now, as of recording, we have very few details about what this thing would look like. But the Victorian Attorney General indicated that there may be exceptions. So this wouldn't actually just be lifting the minimum age of criminal responsibility. There might be carve-outs for particular offences because they said in the very rare instances that children commit serious offences, police will determine appropriate responses. So I'm like, what does that mean? Like, if police are still going to be involved in determining what the response is, does that mean there will be carve-outs? That would be a real failure for the movement to raise the age. It's been done in other jurisdictions where they'll raise it to a particular age except for particular offences like murder or sexual assault or rape or something like that. But the fact is that if a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old is committing an offense like that, first of all, it's so incredibly fucking rare.
Yes.
Second of all, it implies that something has gone seriously wrong. in their life. And it's perhaps even more important that they're diverted from the criminal legal system and that they're given the support that they need and intensive therapeutic case management. There are arguments that if there really is a child who is repeatedly violently offending and at a really serious level, and we're talking about those top level offenses, maybe supervision would be required, but it's not punitive supervision. It's not detention. It would be community-led, multidisciplinary therapeutic support on a very small scale, not these centers where you've got hundreds of kids in fucking cells, but to help that child deal with the trauma, or whether it's substance misuse or an often undiagnosed learning disability or intellectual impairment. Yeah, that's what they need support for. So I think if there are carve-outs, that'll be really concerning and shit.
I love the idea of maintaining this policy. We've got to deter all those other 11-year-old murderers out there because kids adults are absolutely paying attention to sentencing requirements and won't do all the crimes if they know they can go to prison. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah. That's the thing. And when you talk about, I get the impression that it's even stronger in Queensland, this obsession media-wise and in politics with going after the government for being soft on crime. But that's going to happen. Those attacks are going to come from a Liberal or an LNP opposition, regardless of what you do. Being we can't raise the age to 14 because then they'll attack us for being soft on crime and for just giving kids a slap on the wrist. That's already happening. Yes. That's already the argument. And that's why we're just keep getting tougher and tougher laws. And because those laws don't work, because when you lock children up, they offend more and people get more afraid and there's just more fucking hysteria around youth crime. Yeah, it doesn't stop unless you actually implement a circuit breaker. Yes. And that's why, as well, the argument that you need this staged approach because you need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place and the services are funded so that when you divert children from the criminal legal system, they have somewhere to go. Is kind of bullshit because we know that the government just won't do that until they're forced to, effectively. Until they actually take the step to make the legislative change, they probably just won't set up those alternative services or they won't fund anything that they don't fucking have to as long as they can keep funding detention centres, youth prisons.
They also seem to have plenty of money for new prisons, it seems. So why don't you send a little bit of that money to the services way? Yeah,
exactly. If they raise the age, I think so. Right now, the AG in Victoria has said there are no 10 to 12-year-old children currently in custody.
Awesome.
So it means if this change happens, not a single child will be removed from prison.
Okay.
There are 9 children between 13 and 14 years old who are being held, she says, allegedly very serious crimes. But this is the thing. So no impact until 2027 if they win that election. In Queensland, it's a little more, but there are 20 kids in prisons and watch houses aged 10 to 13 on any given day, about 130 cycling through. But that's 10 to 13. So to argue that you need to really take your time to make sure that the infrastructure is in place for them, it's this is a tiny group of children that if you really wanted to, you could put the systems in place to divert them from the criminal system.
Let the children go.
Let the children go. Yeah, we'll put, I think, as one of the call to actions, we'll put the link in the show notes to email your AG and Premier in your state or territory telling them to raise the age to at least 14 with no carve-outs. That's, as I said, the absolute bare minimum age that the UN says is required for the minimum age of criminal responsibility. And that's based on evidence from doctors as well. It's about the neurological development of a child. There's a strong argument that no child should be in prison, but at least 14 when their frontal lobe is not developed, that they literally don't have the capacity to weigh up long-term consequences when they're making decisions. They have very little impulse control. They're still going through this process of what's called synaptic pruning. So that means that not only can they not make great decisions, but if they are subjected to the trauma of contact with the criminal legal system and incarceration in particular, that will affect them in a far more significant way than it would for adults. So all of this, it's 14 is the bare fucking minimum. Please.
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 I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man. I will not. And the government
Here are some other call to actions for this week. Contact your local Labor MP or Senator and ask them to support the Greens' demand for a national rent freeze. I'm sure they'll be very receptive. And our plan for renters. Do something about renters. There's a fucking rental crisis. We want $5 billion direct investment in public and affordable housing per year, doubling the rent assistance, all that good stuff that we discussed on the show. Always, you can go to greens.org.au/housing. That lays out the Greens case, where we stand on the whole housing bill. And of course, Max Chandler Mather is the party spokesperson for housing. Follow him at mchandlermather on Twitter, or of course, keep listening to Serious Danger. He'll be back on here real soon.
So true. Yeah, just come to the live show. Oh, you didn't get tickets. Sad.
Just out. Tomorrow's May Day as well. I don't know, there's stuff going on today, on Sunday as well, across the country. May Day, very important part in the... Oh, we don't need a trade union movement anymore because we've got a Labor government.
Well, that's right. Yeah, so don't bother.
Don't bother.
Or you could go to a rally if you want, commemorate, it's kind of the shearers' strike is what we're really commemorating in Australia, is that right?
No, I think it's earlier than that. It's the 8-hour workday back in 1856.
Yeah, but then in Australia, the equivalent, no?
No, that's the 8-hour workday in Australia. Yeah, I mean,
sorry, my bad.
And there are certain rallies that happen on various May Days that then became a new milestone and stuff. But basically, workers getting together, fighting a better deal under capitalism. Good shit.
Yeah, sounds good. Rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening now. You can support us on Patreon, just $3 a month. Get access to fun bonus episodes like the chat with my sister about killer robots. And follow us on @SeriousDangerAU on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Info is at seriousdangerpod.com. Also, you can email us at hello@seriousdangerpod.com. Anything else?
Let's go out with Adam's little closing remarks from his national address. I think it was quite inspiring.
Google it, mate.
No, it's saying some other stuff.
No, okay.
See you next week, everyone. Bye.
The Greens have a vision for the future. Free education, free childcare, freeze and cap rents, mental and dental as part of Medicare, a 4-day work week. We are already the only party with a policy to seriously tackle the climate crisis, and we're going to be known as the party with the only serious way of tackling the cost of living and the housing crises too. By stopping the handouts to the big corporations and billionaires and making them pay their fair share of tax, we will fund the services that will make this country more equal, and we will end the housing, the cost of living and the climate crises. And in doing so, we will build a better life for everyone. Thank you.
Serious Danger Australia.